Alright, the next parameter or next module we're talking about is ADSR. Let's start with just the basics. The first basics of it is, if you look at like in Wikipedia here and it's showing you the ADSR, and basically it's trying to show you this envelope. And that's going to be basically, if you come over to here and look at these parameters, how it's stating it, attack time is the time taken for the initial run up of level from 0 to peak, beginning when the key is first pressed. That's very simple to understand. Decay time. Decay time is the time taken for the subsequent run down from the attack level peak to the designated sustain level. That means after it's hit its peak, it starts to drop down. And then once it starts to drop down, it's going to reach another level, is the sustain level. The sustain level is the level during the main sequence of the sound's duration until the key is released. So, it's basically, you have the sustain level that's going to go along after it has the attack and decay to where, you got, and you've got that sustain part before you start to actually release. Because the release is going to happen here, and how long it takes to go from that sustain level down to 0. Release time is the time taken for the level to decay from the sustain level after you stop the note to 0 after the key is released. And that's a very simple concept. And try to keep it that simple in your mind. We're going to talk about it some more, but that can also be part of the frequencies also and some other parameters. Inverted ADSR envelope, things like that I'm not going to get into. You can play with those kind of things, but we're just trying to address the basic concept of what ADSR is. So, it's an envelope generator that's actually going to be applied to some sound that you've created from your oscillators, right? Or from your sound in your sample. So, and you get into there's an 8-step envelope, and basically it's dealing with those same parameters, but has added some more stops along the way. So, very simply that you've got this attack, and then you've got this decay, and then it decays differently here, and then does that make sense? And then it's going back up to the sustain level, and then, as it drops off, it's doing some other weird thing here. So, that envelope is fairly complex. So, those ADSR, that basic ADSR concept can get very complex in some situations because some waveforms are very complex, and so, the basic ADSR concept is very simple to understand. And when you get into this, that you understand that basically this here is trying to shape that waveform in that way from attack to end. So that like when you're looking at, like, let's say you're looking at this and you're looking at this waveform, right? And you've got this crash symbol. Well, it's trying to, that envelope is trying to shape this to where these decibel levels, to where, you've got the initial attack, and if you go way down, you can see what the attack starts to look like. It's got some parts in here that are jumped out of the normal, the obvious climb of it, and then how it drops down a little bit to sustain, or comes down here to sustain. And sometimes it's real obvious and sometimes it's not. The basic structure sometimes can look, just like a knob, and then it dies off. And sometimes it won't. It'll be real obvious, that envelope in there. But that's what that envelope is trying to shape. So that if you're looking at, a piece of audio and you're seeing it, that, from beginning to end, and you go down real close to it, that you're really starting to see that the actual shape of it and how it's trying to emulate that with that ADSR. Does that make sense? And it's, sometimes it can be real obvious, and sometimes you really got to look at it. Like over here, here's that sustain coming into an end, and then it drops down. Well, it, hit the end of that sustain, then it dropped down like it's going to the release. Well, it sloped like that, and then it started really trailing off. So, that's not, the basics that we just looked at, right? So that's something different, So how would you address that? Would have to be some other parameter on the ADSR. So, like we had just looked at there, that, you'd have to have something here, and it would have to do like, it would be going along here somewhere, and that thing would be trailing off like that, like we just seen on that thing. So they've put themselves another little nodule here to adjust between the end of that sustain and the release, how the release is sloping down like we just seen on that waveform. And that's the basic concept of ADSR. You know, you basically have the basic concept of how fast it's going up to peak, had the decay coming down to the sustain level, and that sustain level can be long, you know. I mean, really, you know, the actual, you know, that decay comes down to there, the decay can be long, or the sustain can be long, or the release can be long, but that sustain level from there, I mean, all those things can be stretched out in any way you want. And on sometimes it'll have parameters like this that you can actually address it for the issue we just seen on that waveform. Because some of them they'll be, you know, the attack will look like that or look like that, or I mean, it can look in all kinds of different ways. And sometimes you might not be able to address that directly with whatever, you know, parameters you have for adjusting that envelope. And that's a basic look at it. Let's take a look at some other applications. So basically, whenever you're looking at the ADSR, that's what it's trying to do. And those are the basic parameters that you're dealing with. And you know, all the ways that you might be able to adjust this, that, you know, it might have all kinds of different parameters for adjusting that basic concept of ADSR so that that envelope can be adjusted however you want. And you have to look at this module the same way you're looking at the oscilloscope module, is that, you know, it might have other parameters in there that may be directly related to the ADSR or doing some other type of things that aren't just the basic concept that we just talked about. And you have to investigate them to see what's going on. Here's a knob down here. This parameter, it's delay. So basically when you're looking at this, that it's actually delaying that, you know, from the time it starts before it even starts adjusting the attack. Does that make sense? So you have actually a pre-delay before it even begins the ADSR envelope being applied to whatever parameter or whatever module you might be applying it to. You're applying it to the oscilloscope or the filter, or who knows what all your synthesizer might be able to apply that ADSR envelope to. And sometimes you'll have a basic ADSR envelope that's just for amplitude, so you're dealing with the amplitude in the wave shape like we just talked about. And you'll have other ADSR envelopes that you can assign to whatever parameters you want. So like, let's say you've got this envelope 2 that's right here, and you've put it on here, and or the routing we've talked about, and so you want to control something else, you want it to shape something else. So you might be putting it on that LFO frequency so that that ADSR is actually being applied to that low frequency oscillator, or it might be being applied to the oscillator itself, or it might be being applied to the noise level or the pan of the noise level or the filters. It might be can actually apply that ADSR to this filter cutoff on this filter module. You know, so you kind of want to look at that and what all you can do with that. I don't want to get into right now what all you could apply that to, but the basic concept is sometimes you'll have other ADSR, you know, tools or, you know, envelopes there that you can actually assign to other parameters on there. But that's basically the concept of ADSR, of the attack, decay, sustain, and release, you know, from a start point in time to an end point in time, and the length of that, you know, that's the basic concept, and you're trying to apply that to some parameter. So that's a real basic concept, and I hope that wasn't complicated at all, so that when you look at the ADSR, that you understand, you know, basically what it's trying to do. The complexities of what it can do can be very complex. But just so that, you know, as you get into more complex synthesis and things you might be applying it to, that you understand the basic concept of what it's doing. One thing to get into your head is that sometimes you might be applying it to things that, you know, might make the actual concepts, you might have to kind of rethink the concept in your mind. If you go try to apply it to, you know, the panning, you know, what's that doing? You know, so you've applied this ADSR envelope, you know, to this panning, you know, parameter. So what is that going to mean? That's not going up in volume and sustaining, so it's doing something else with that envelope, right? I mean, is it panning up to the right and then coming down to the left and then sustaining and then dropping down to the right again? I mean, whenever you start trying to apply that ADSR to some other parameter on the synthesizer, you really have to just stop for a minute, look at what the actual parameter you're trying to apply that ADSR to, and really understand the concept of what it's doing. You know, what's it adjusting, you know, over that time from beginning to end and release. How's it, you know, going after that parameter, and how is it adjusting it over time? And, you know, we're not going to get into what all it can do or how it's doing that with all the different parameters right now, but just to understand that, so that if you start applying that ADSR to some other parameter or some other module on the synthesizer, that just to stop for a minute, get out the book and understand exactly how that ADSR on that synthesizer is going to apply that envelope to that module or that other parameter that's on the synthesizer, that synthesizer's been designed to be able to interconnect them. And if you approach it like that, and one step at a time, you know that you should be okay with that basic understanding of what the ADSR tool is doing. Because for the most part, it was designed to dealing with the frequencies, so that you'd be applying that to the actual frequencies on here, the tuning of them, or the amplitude, so that you're dealing with the attack, decay, sustain, and release of the amplitude and or frequency content. And so that's real easy to understand. And when you start applying it to other things, to really look at how that synthesizer is applying that tool to that parameter or that module. So I hope you understand attack, decay, sustain, and release now, and that you understand that that envelope is there to actually adjust those parameters of those modules and the parameters inside those modules, and what that means, and a basic understanding of it, because the complexities that can arise when you start applying that all over the place can be very complex, you know. But with the basic understanding of what it's doing, working with that module should be much easier, and at least you have an understanding of what it's trying to do. And the next thing is try to figure out what that synthesizer thinks it's trying to do to whatever parameter that, or whatever module it's applying it to, because that's more than likely going to be a key aspect of being able to use that function in the specific synthesizer that you're working with. Peace, hope, love. See you in the next video.